Once upon a time, a bunch of tribes were conquered by an empire. Centuries later, the survivors of these tribes banded together to try and rejuvenate their culture, but they did so very poorly. Sup guys, welcome back to Nations of Minecraft. So the whole country of Lonia is basically just one tribal reservation that hosts the survivors of the old Lonian tribes, but the modern nation of Lonia has in no way lived up to the glory of the old Lonian tribes. It hasn't even come close, and now we'll explain why. So, for one, Lonia is very small. It's the second smallest country in the world next to Auria, and it's the least populated country in the world. So, you can't really divide it up any more than just the reservation and everything else. Like, most people live on the reservation. This is what it looks like. It's just a little area of land next to this lake, and the whole rest of the country kind of looks the same, just badlands, and basically nobody lives there. And yeah, so here are the biomes, like I just said. It's mostly badlands. There's a bit of desert on the border with Tibwig, but again, nobody lives there. And as you can see here, almost everyone lives on the reservation. Here's a temperature map. It's mostly pretty warm, but not quite as hot as their neighbors. And this is a humidity map. It's very dry. The whole country's just dry. Now, here's where it gets a bit interesting. This is a language map, so everyone speaks Vertian as a second language here. They speak Vertian just like their Vertian neighbors, but most of the people who live on the reservation will speak this language, which is Lonian. At least that's what it's called. So now, suppose they tried to reconstruct the language of the ancient Lonian tribes and and resurrect that dead language and start speaking it again. But it's debated how close this Lonian language is to the ancient Lonian language, but they tried. It still is impressive what they did. This is the only example so far of anyone ever resurrecting a dead language, even if they didn't do it perfectly. They tried their best. They tried their best with what knowledge they had. So now let's talk about the history so you can better understand what the whole deal is. So, like I said, there was the Pan-Lone tribe, this is where the name Lonia comes from, wasn't even in the territory where modern-day Lonia is, which is over here. But, yeah, the Pan-Lone tribe used to be the biggest tribe in the east, and it was a very important tribe because it basically allowed people... This is the tribe where people started actually cultivating the river and stuff. But this tribe didn't actually last that long. It lasted like 100-ish years, and then it split apart into 6 other tribes due to infighting, and those tribes lasted for over 1,000 years. So there was a Lonian language back when Panlone was the thing. There was a Lonian language, which they tried to reconstruct, but then they split into these other tribes, and they spoke a few different languages. And the funny thing is, there was never, like, after the fall of the Panlone tribe, there was never a united Lonian identity. These tribes all kind of, like, hated each other and went to war with each other many different times. So they all kind of were rivals for, like, over 1,000 years until the Distan Empire formed, and Distan, one by one, conquered almost all the tribes in the east, including all of the Lonian tribes. Eventually they conquered, like, the whole east. And the Distan wanted everyone to culturally assimilate to them. So they did not want any nationalist movements. They did not want any tribes trying to break away after they'd conquered them. So here's what they did. It was actually pretty clever. Anytime there were any nationalists in a former tribal territory, what they would do is they would just scatter them out to, like, far territories so that they wouldn't be able to rally up a nationalist movement. So they would just disperse them and exile them, anyone who was a nationalist. And that's why the Distan Empire is so ethnically mixed. So yeah, whatever Lonian nationalists there were scattered all across the empire. And because this was so effective, as the generations passed, most of them gave up. But a few of them didn't. A few of them still held on to their Lonian identities. And even though the Lonian tribes had hated each other because they were all trying to resist the Distan Empire wiping out their culture, they became more unified. So when the Distan Empire fell, they were able to actually communicate with each other more. Fast forward to the days of the Green Plateau and the Titan War. The Green Plateau wanted allies against the Titans, so um, they invited the Lonians, the Lonian nationalists, to join their side if the Green Plateau gave them a reservation where they could have their own land. And they agreed. Now, the Green Plateau did kind of give them crappy land, as most, nations do when they're giving a tribe a reservation. But it was still better than nothing. So they actually had a reservation. So this was their reservation. They were all grouped together. And even though they came from different tribes, they all just had a common Lonian identity. And most of them weren't purely Lonian, but, again, it was close enough. It was the best they could do. So then, eventually, the Navaket Empire was what ruled this land, and they still kept having the reservation there. They still kept funding the Lonian reservation. But eventually, when the Navaket Empire fell, Versha was a region that, along with after Ravinia, gained independence. We talked about this in the Bodam episode. Versha was led by this guy Dramvo, and then ended up being a dictator, so they assassinated him. And then once they did, they didn't know where the capital should be and who should be in charge, whether it should be here or here. And after that, the Lonian reservation was just kind of like, you know what? We're out of here. We're not dealing with this. We're just making our own thing. And then these other two countries formed. So then, when these countries first formed, when Lonia first had its own country and wasn't just a reservation in another country, they all loved each other. They were all best friends because they'd all been through the same stuff. And even though Lonia had a slightly different culture, they got along just fine. But then it all changed when these countries, who were part of the Navakeshan Confederation, got interested in Lonia. Now, these countries were like the cool kids, and the Vershans, Lonia and their friends, were kind of seen as the uncool kids. And Lonia actually discovered how to grow bamboo. The reason they did this is before the mods were removed, the Lonian tribes had bamboo all along the river. When the mods were removed, all this bamboo got turned into spruce. But Lonians figured out how to basically make a new form of bamboo. This was like the best achievement to come out of the modern state of Lonia, even though ancient Lonian tribes invented tons of stuff, including bow and arrow. That was the Komping tribe. That's a story for another day. But they invented bamboo, and the Navakeshan states wanted it, so they let Lonia join the Navakeshan Confederation. And the Navakeshan states, especially Jernaya, started dominating the bamboo trade, and they gave Lonia a bit of money. So for economic reasons, Lonia joined the Navakeshan Confederation. And they were happy about this, but their Vershan friends felt kind of betrayed that they're now sitting with the cool kids. So, yeah, it's kind of awkward. So, in terms of sights to see, it's basically just a reservation. There's just one thing. It's just one thing in the whole country, and the rest just looks like this, except without the reservation. That's it. Alright, so now let's talk about their relations. So, like I just said, it's kind of awkward with these countries because, Lonia kind of left them behind when they joined the cool kids. Now, Lonia's trying to get along better with the Navakeshan Confederation, but Lonia's still kind of excluded. Not excluded. They're just introverts. They don't really fit in. It's debatable whether or not they're actually ethnically Navakeshan. And it's especially awkward because Tibwig has always wanted to join the Navakeshan Confederation, and they're like, no, you're... Sorry, that should say you're not Navakeshan, you are Vershan. And they're like, but you let Lonia in, and they're like, well, they have bamboo. So, yeah, it makes things kind of complicated. But yeah, that's where they're at. In conclusion, even though Lonia is a small, insignificant country, what they've done is very impressive given what they've had. Stay tuned. Man Platin is coming up next.